Hello, everybody, and welcome to PGS Moving Image. I am your host, RM. And of course, we have with us today Kat. Kat, how are you?
I'm really good. You too?
Yes, I am doing well, and it's such a pleasure to have you here. Catherine, you and I have been reviewing movies for quite some time, and tonight is no exception. You and I are going to be covering the Oscars in a few weeks or so. I'm so excited to talk about these two films that certainly I don't really consider ordinary in any case. Past Lives and Poor Things. And certainly they are both nominated for Best Movie. And this list, it's quite a big list, Catherine. But I have to say, out of the two films that I've chosen or that we've chosen tonight to review, you can't help but, look at the fact that Poor Things production design and costume design are maybe the best I've seen. I can't even imagine what I've seen in this film. Catherine, what do you think from the get-go? Because even from the poster of Poor Things and a lot of its promotional materials, you know right away that this is no ordinary film, right?
Yeah, it's the set design and everything is really what makes the movie. And it looked like definitely the most unique looking movie of the year. And it's like channeling this 19th century type vibe, but it also almost feels like you're watching almost like a puppet show because some of the backgrounds look deliberately kind of fake. And it just gives it this very unique look, which I felt was necessary because the film has a very slow, deliberate type of pacing to it because there aren't very many moving parts to this story. And so it's more like it's eye candy.
It really is a lot of eye candy. There's a lot of texture. There's very subtle tones in some cases. There's a lot of structure to some of this clothing, while at the same time, there are certain areas of the body that are exposed in very deliberate ways. We have this main character, which I think is so essential to the story, William Dafoe. And of course, his character is the doctor, if you will, who you can kind of get a sense that he's very unusual and different just by the look on and the prosthesis that they put onto William Dafoe. He was an excellent choice to play this role. What do you think, Catherine?
Well, Willem Dafoe always shows up to play for stuff like this. He's got such a varied filmography, very versatile actor, and I like how he acts so straight laced about what he's doing. Like, oh well, the mother was dead, and of course I did the natural thing. I just swapped the brains. Of course, what it was the obvious thing to do, and his assistant just kind of looks at him like, huh? Yeah, and it's just he just goes along with it like it's no big deal. And then when what's her name, Bella develops some problems for him, he's like, oh yeah, just sign this contract and I'll let you guys get married and you could just stay inside the house for the rest of your lives. Like it's just a normal thing. And he's like, excuse me. And so I liked that he's once again playing a very quirky character, and you're not really sure exactly what his motives are because you see that he's done these little mad scientist experiments with the animals and the farm animals and stuff, and now he's just done it with Bella. But it's like, well, oh, he's like, the experiment might work, it might fail. They take her out to do these simple tasks like, can you catch the ball and things like that. And it's like, okay, so you on the one hand have a bit of a Frankenstein god complex where you're trying to prove that you could turn her into this. So is it really that it seemed like the most common sense thing to do, or are you just saying that? But the movie doesn't really stick with him very long because it's only like maybe the first third before it takes off, the story takes off in another direction, and we see that he's already replaced her to try and create somebody else. But I liked that it's like doing the Frankenstein thing, but not as a horror movie, more as like a comedy, and like he's sweet natured, even though the ethics of what he's doing isn't quite up to snuff.
Yeah, and this film has a lot of layers to it, and I think that obviously centrally to this idea that we actually kind of get a sense, and I'm not even quite sure whether it's true or not, but William Dafoe's character almost kind of takes pity on these individuals who either he feels have been either died before their time, or he feels that the body's still warm. We hear him say things that would give you the impression that these individuals are still alive, but they are not. They are actually deceased. And he has this desire, not just as an experiment and not just as a let's say a doctor in a theater to show his students. He has this desire to pursue this. So he's absolutely obsessed in doing stuff like this. And as you said, Catherine, he goes on with his mission even after the main character kind of goes off on her exploratory journey. But I think in addition to this really beautifully done, perfectly arranged, production design, the costumes are perfectly arranged for what we're supposed to see. There's absolutely no area where we would go where we would say, well, that doesn't really seem to fit well. It all seems to fit in well in this magical world that was created. And I really haven't seen very much like this, nor am I like to see anything else like this. It's had such a very unique tone, a very unique theme. And even when certain areas of the film where the character's journey goes that I didn't care for, I couldn't help but watch it because you're so invested in the story that of a character that is this fantastical creature. She's a fantastical creature. She's not a normal person anymore, right, Catherine? She's supposedly the brain of an infant in the head and body of an adult. And this becomes this almost like a fairy tale kind of story, but maybe a fairy tale, somewhat nightmarish story. Do you think that this film, Catherine, considering what they are approaching and talking about and having to execute it with outlandish performances, because a lot of the performances were quite outlandish, let's say even for people who were not so altered as a doctor or as the main character, do you think that it gets its point across? And what do you think? Do you think it deserved to be nominated for best movie?
Well, it's certainly unique and it's very different. I admit that it seems slow because Bella's a very one-note character because she's kind of, by definition, like an infant in a way. She's just kind of learning everything, and she hasn't really learned to walk very well or talk, and then once she learns how to have sex and stuff, it becomes a very one-track mind, and that's all she kind of wants to do, and then there's nothing else really to the character. And so you're kind of, which is why I was more or less intrigued by the design of the film and the aesthetics and everything, and then of course the Mark Ruffalo character playing such a jerk, but in a really funny way. And I usually don't see him play roles like that, so it seemed like, okay, this is kind of new. And there's some good humor in there, but you're basically just watching her kind of experience this fantasy world as herself a fantasy character. And people always want to see fresh and unique things, and so it's getting recognition for that.
Yeah, it certainly is fresh and new. And I did also want to mention some other elements about the film. A lot of thought and care was taken into how it was going to be presented to the viewer, including where let's say a substantial part of the beginning of the film, Catherine, is shot in black and white. And I really enjoyed that they took the time to kind of show it as a point before she has this blossoming, or however you want to call it, this awakening, this sexual awakening, which seems to be the case for her. And I think it does present a very eerie, a very shocking, a very kind of dour, kind of dark existence for this character. And then as you suddenly get this, this experience that she has, or realization of this outside world, then you're introduced to sort of color, and it is quite colorful, it's quite magical, and it does feel very surrealist. It feels like almost as if magic is happening. And I think that that's what they wanted us to feel. I think it wasn't necessarily the easiest thing to accomplish, to do something like this. And when you take on something like this, it has to be just right. You can't make mistakes in this type of production, or else it's just going to fall flat. People are going to lose interest in it. And also it's going to look ridiculous. I couldn't really find anything wrong with the film. Now, Catherine, I admit that I didn't care for the part. What's so fascinating to me, Catherine, is this. Mark Ruffalo's character seems like he's the perfect companion for her. I mean, he's put up with a lot of what's going on here. He knows she's unusual. He knows she's different. Who knows, what's going through his mind. But when we look at the big picture, he really seemed like he was a good companion for her. And then this bombshell where they kind of end up in Paris, stranded, but not really broke. And she decides to kind of go into this life of ill repute. That really threw me. Catherine, what did you think about that part of the film?
Well, first of all, the reason the movie goes to color when she leaves is because she's making the choice to leave the house and is no longer a prisoner there. I don't think they were a good pairing at all, either her and the Ruffalo guy. 'Cause he's just in it because, oh look, easy sex. Where she's interested in like leaving the apartment when they're or leaving their hotel room, and she's going exploring and she's seeing all these wonderful things and is kind of interested. And he gets kind of upset with her because he just wants her to stay home and not go out and make a scene all the time. But she's discovering so many things for the first time, whereas he just all he wants to do is just have sex or whatever, and then keep her in the closet like a coat that you're hanging out. Like he doesn't really want to engage with her, which is why he keeps getting increasingly upset with her throughout the journey. And you have all the absurdities that happen, like when they're on the boat trip, which is quite funny. But once she shows up in Paris and, not understanding the concept of what a brothel is, and he's, of course, disgusted by that because he's like this, presenting himself as this hoity-toity guy when he's really a jerk, which is why it kind of rings false that really you're the one who's going to put your foot down about this, like you're some moral bastion of a person up to this point. But she kind of goes along with it because she enjoys it and doesn't really think twice about it. While he's, too proud. Oh, I can't accept that kind of money. But of course, he's drawn back to her because he's failed at everything else, fallen flat on his face. He's lost all his money because she's, gambled it away, or given it away to ill-meaning sailors who aren't going to do the charitable work she wanted. But again, she's very childlike and innocent. So she saw the people suffering and she wanted to help them. And that creep on the boat who made her feel really bad about herself. And so she decided to do something about it by giving, donating the money. And so when she ends up at the brothel, it's like, oh, well, her naive view of it is, well, I like having sex and that's what we're doing here, except now I'm getting paid for it. And she does rightly say at one point that I think you're just upset with me about this because I'm getting paid for it as opposed to the fact that I'm doing it, which historically more or less has been the accurate assessment. But because he was such a kind of a schmuck himself, and admittedly a really funny one to watch, I didn't really care about his protests. I just thought his little meltdown was really funny. It just, admittedly, at that point in the film, it does feel like it feels almost too long. Because again, she's a very one-track type mind character, and it's not like there's various plot lines or subplots going. I mean, you cut back to the house every once in a while to see what the scientist is up to, and he already has replaced her and is trying to pursue that. But I did like that aspect of the movie, and I like that it doesn't shy away, that just because you're dealing with like sex and all that type of stuff, it doesn't get all puritanical about it, which is fine.
No, there was nothing really puritanical. There wasn't a whole bunch of people saying, well, that is the worst thing I've ever heard, or any of that kind of rebuttal type of comments. In fact, when she goes and speaks to other people on the ship or in different situations, people are responding very differently. That older woman with that gentleman with her, how she had said she hadn't done anything for 22 years and she was quite surprised by all of this. And, there was a lot of time focusing on that type of, sexuality part for this character. Now, and guys, I'm sorry about the spoilers, but we also find out that her past, she doesn't remember anything of who she was before this transformation. And we do kind of find out where she comes from. And it is almost terrifying to think, this abusive relationship that she had, I guess, with her first husband does kind of get revealed to us in a very, it almost felt very kind of, I'm going to say, Wuthering Heights, or, maybe a Jane Eyre way, that's about to get married. And then the person says, no, you can't do that. You can't go ahead and marry this person, because the person is already married or whatever it is. Did that surprise you?
I knew it was going to show up at one point, because there's that moment when she and the Mark Ruffalo character are out in the first city they went to visit, and he gets up to go to the bar or the bathroom or something, and this lady recognizes her and calls her by what we what to be her original name. And obviously you don't put things like in the movie like that at random. So I knew that was going to come back at some point. Like we were going to find out who is she and what's this about. But the fact that what really surprised me was that, the husband comes back, disrupts the wedding, and you'd think the scientist would just explain the situation. I couldn't tell. It's like the husband aware of the fact that this mad scientist has literally taken his unborn infant's brain and put it inside his wife's head. Like, this isn't really your wife anymore. and he doesn't seem to get that, and then he turns out to be even more of a creep. And then, even though this Ruffalo character here is the one who tipped off the husband, because he found out what was going on, and that just made that scene, made him all the more pathetic when he shows up at the wedding with him. It's like, see, I told you. But it's like, I wonder if the husband would have done the same thing if he knew that, or if he told, Bella is not really, or the fact that she has this whole new identity and this is not even her real brain anymore. It's like, but he decides to take her anyway because he's just so old fashioned and he's so controlling, and you just can't stand the idea of having been cheated out of something that he felt was his. And so he decides to take her in, and we just see how much of a creep he really, that guy turns out to be. And I was surprised that became more or less the focus of the climax, because admittedly this isn't, there's nothing really normal, traditional about the story structure of this movie. You're just kind of going around. It's like, it'd be one thing if you bring up who she is and have that more or less be a consequence for the scientist who chose to do this, because it seems like the husband would be unleashing his wrath on the scientist. It's like, oh, you found her having committed suicide, and your solution was not to return her to me so she could have a proper burial, but to do this crazy mad scientist project where you're just going to keep her locked up in this place forever. And instead, it just kind of follows him and just makes him the villain and focuses on that. And it was like, okay, that's kind of a surprise narrative. But given the pacing of the movie, how slow it was, I thought, okay, we'll deal with the husband storyline. But I thought at some point they were going to get back to the mad scientist in a more meaningful way, and they didn't really do that. Once you find out what they do to, her evil, abusive husband, it's like, well, in the beginning of the movie, it was kind of dark to find when we found out what happened to Bella, but now at the end of the movie, they twist it around so they want you to kind of be happy about the fact that he's done the same thing to the husband, albeit, turned him more into, well, like a duck brain or something, or whatever it is at the end in the garden. So it was very surprising the directions this movie goes. But it still felt quite wrong, and some of the laughs for me were few and far between. Like, it was, again, eye candy mostly. Very quirky, but it didn't as narratively come together. I mean, I did give it a 4 out of 5 because it was just, wow. It was so new and unique, such an approach to a movie, but it wasn't something I would necessarily revisit that often.
Yeah, and I think certainly because it is so unique, it is an acquired taste. Mind you, for a good portion of it, I liked what I was seeing, and I certainly did not dislike very much of it, other than the broth, as I mentioned to you, the brothel part. And of course, the cast has done incredibly well in the Golden Globe category, Catherine, right? Um, and, of course, I'm thinking in my mind, of course, we're talking about the Best Picture Oscar. However, on an individual scale, many of the cast have done very well. The Golden Globes. I don't know whether this picture is from that. It probably is, but I can't help but thinking that they might still get more awards coming up. But honestly, when I even look at the choice, let's say the casting, agents, whoever picked these guys, I think they did a perfect job. I think everybody who was put in each one of these roles seemed to work out pretty well. And, even down to the point where the assistant, William Dafoe has to choose this kind of assistant who apparently is on the same wavelength as William Dafoe, because even though he finds things that are shocking about her, he doesn't, fly off the handle. He just kind of, goes with the flow, because perhaps he has the same intentions and direction. He wrote that paper, and William Dafoe says, I read your paper. Would you like to become assistant of mine? Were you surprised that he wanted that man to marry Bella?
I didn't really think one way or another about it, because it's like the guy kind of likes Bella, and because the scientist is interested in Bella being more or less evolved and more normal, he decides that, okay, we'll just marry her. It was kind of like, whatever, maybe that's why he hired him as an assistant in the first place. And once Bella left, maybe he was going to plan on doing the same thing with the assistant and the new replacement Bella, maybe. But again, the movie doesn't really dive deep and explore any of these other avenues to really pick it apart at all.
Well, Catherine, when when I look at this film and when people ask me about this film, to be honest with you, I think a lot of it is just this pure fantasy. If you could do things like this, how would it turn out? And they don't shy away from the fantasy. They embrace the fantasy. And, even, I think it's very interesting because when Bella is confronted with that reality moment that you mentioned, I think one of the other uh, people in the chat mentioned it. Even when she has her reality moment, I think it is very different from another film that we see where a character has a reality moment, a character that we didn't think would have a reality moment, then all of a sudden turns into sort of more of a character that has to confront the reality of life. And Bella does go through that too. But once again, surprisingly, when she has that reality moment, it's not what snaps her into remembering who she is. It has to be something else that does that. So that was also another very interesting layer about it. What are your final thoughts on this film? I know you said that, of course, it's very, very, very original, so well made. I haven't seen anything like this in ages. Catherine, what are your final thoughts on this? Because I think that for an execution of a film of this type, it's a 10 out of 10, but it's not everybody's taste. What do you think, Catherine?
Yeah, visually and aesthetically, it would be a 10. Definitely a win probably for production design. But again, it's not a movie I would probably revisit that often. It was good, very well cast, but very quirky, very offbeat, and very one note type stuff that to me is reliant more on the eye candy aspect in terms of just the set design and the colors and all of that than so much the characters. It's like, okay, you have a few quirky characters here, but there's no real arcs. It's kind of going around the climax again, kind of comes out of left field. And it's like, okay, So that's good. I don't think it'll win Best Picture, but it was good.
Yeah, I would be surprised if it won Best Picture, but it certainly has turned a lot of heads. And, I think the lead actress certainly does. She certainly deserves a lot of the accolades she's gotten for playing this role because it took so much to execute this character to make her believable.
Oh yeah, I think
That it
she's
was
probably Emma Stone's probably the front runner at the Oscars for this year.
Absolutely, Catherine. I was just taken, she took my breath away sometimes from this character, especially when she walks around. I'm not gonna say not fully dressed, but for the era where she's kind of wearing pantaloons or shorts or whatever it is, and she's kind of walking around with a big puffy jacket, the exaggerated shoulders on that. I can't remember what those are called just now. But and then, the sort of pantaloons at the bottom. And I thought to myself, she's not wearing a regular skirt like everyone else. Is someone going to say something? And they just kind of, in this surrealist world, they left her alone. But I enjoyed seeing her kind of explore the world in this new way. And I think that this type of imagination to pull this off has no limits going forth. So it really was quite an accomplishment for this production team. So I would recommend the film to anybody who wants to see it. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but if you want something different and, maybe a masterstroke in filmmaking, this might be the one. If you want a different experience, it's not going to be like any other film you've seen. Now, Catherine, let's talk about Past Lives, another film that I think is really interesting because I think the film immediately when you see it, it's like they're toying with you in a sense because I feel like they're almost making this promise to give you something that you don't actually get in the film. And I think that they hook you with it. It looks good, like you see this couple together, this man and woman together, and you feel like there must be this monumental thing that has happened to them, that the title of the film has to be Past Lives, when in actuality I don't think there was really anything monumental that happens for this. Of course, it's referring to a belief where if you are encounter with someone and you see them a lot, you must have had this past life. But it feels like it falls short to me, Catherine, especially with just maybe the way that the leading lady treats the leading man in this. What did you think about this film, Catherine? And was it what you were expecting when you saw it?
I think the movie doesn't work because it's dependent on you being really invested in this what could have been relationship. And it's like what, maybe 6 or 7 minutes into the movie where they get separated as kids, and then barely 10 minutes after that where they're reconnecting over Skype. And one, you have to spend a lot of time of that early potential relationship to really care about it. Then you have to spend time on their separate lives and how miserable it is. So you're really actively rooting for them to get back together. So you could really feel that when they finally do reconnect. But because it's like barely 15 minutes into the movie, it's like you haven't spent any time trying to get me to invest in this. And even though both lead actors were really good, and some of the best couples acting like we've seen all year, it's like I just didn't care enough. It's like you didn't do anything to get me to feel like there was anything big that either of them missed out on by not staying together, because they were like, what, in first grade when they separated? It's like, okay, big deal. And the way the guy there keeps going on about what could have been and what we could, it's like that's the type of stuff you're thinking when you are in these stories. You don't usually say it out loud, so it makes it a bit more melodramatic. And everybody can relate to this on a different level. Everybody's had the situation where, oh, what could have been if I made this decision or that life decision or whatever. But this one wants you to really feel like, wow, this is the one that got away from both their perspectives, and it just doesn't work because, again, it's like, okay, they walked home from school, and so you could see that they're kind of cutesy, maybe, or friends, and then she immigrates to Canada, eventually immigrates to New York, and oh, he's looking me up on Skype, okay. And then you could tell they're not really longing for each other that much because their plans to visit each other fall apart because they each meet somebody else. And in his case, he ends up breaking up with his significant other before he actually meets her again face to face, where she's since gotten married. And then you just have this bizarre subplot kind of develop with her husband, where he's like, oh, I'm not bothered by it, which he shouldn't be, because again, this is a very common scenario for people where you run into people you haven't seen in decades, like, oh, hi, how's it going? At no point did I think she was seriously considering leaving her husband to go be with this guy. So the fact that you could tell he's clearly bothered by the scenario, even though he says he's not, is kind of dumb. And like what? And when he's like, oh, I feel like you may have only married me for your green card. I'm like, where is this coming from? It's like, this feels out of place in this movie. And it's a shame because I think the two lead actors in this are really good. And they have a lot of great chemistry with each other. And I think the director did a great job. I would love seeing another movie directed by her, but this just didn't hit the mark at all. It's like you got to be invested in them to care about bringing characters back together if you're going to do that type of storyline. And when most of their dialogue is just kind of melodramatic, where he's just constantly going on about what could have been, and it's like, well, I didn't feel like your life was super depressing to the point, like I didn't believe he was longing for this for a long time. It's more like he got nostalgic for a bit and decided to look her up, found her, they were talking for a bit, and he obviously didn't care enough because he stopped talking to her and canceled his trip overseas to be with his significant other until he broke up with her. And so it's like, I'm not really, I mean, the cinematography's great, the acting's great, but no, it didn't, I gave this a 3 out of 5. It was okay. I don't think this is a Best Picture worthy material, and I don't think I'm not surprised that it didn't really get nominated for much else.
Yeah, Catherine, I agree with everything you said. And certainly one of the things that really concerned me about this film is the fact that, there's a lot of these sort of gazing at one another, like all the photos that I've been showing, it's like kind of like gazing at each other, looking at each other. But nothing is really being said about, you broke my heart when you left and I realized I couldn't live without you kind of comments. And like you, I was very surprised when the husband went ahead and said, I can't tell sometimes if you really love me. And I'm like, where the hell is that coming from?
Exactly.
It was so weird for anybody to say something like that to somebody, and I'm sure it must have thrown her as well. But I almost had to question the notion of when she actually tells him, hey, I don't think we should talk to each other anymore. I'm like, that's the end of the movie. That's it. Like, it's done. This relationship that you claim that you really care about this guy, you wouldn't be telling him you wouldn't want to talk to him anymore if you really loved him. So it felt a little contradictory, and then not talk for 12 years or whatever amount of time it was. It was odd. They kept
Right.
implying.
That was another thing. It was a really long time jump. So they clearly didn't love each other or miss each other that much. So it's like, you're not really selling this. It's like, yeah, everybody has the concept where they, or the conundrum where they wonder what could have been for any number of types of scenarios. This movie is just people constantly saying it out loud. It's like, okay, melodrama alert. It's like, and by the way, I
Yeah,
didn't think these two had any chemistry at all. Like, I didn't
none.
buy that
They didn't have
relationship
any.
very much. I
It
mean, that's
was
the
they
only credit you may have had for saying, I don't think we're really good. You might not have liked me because they don't have chemistry, but that whole storyline didn't seem to go anywhere either. Because it's like, we as an audience don't feel like she necessarily made the wrong choice because we don't know enough about that relationship with her husband to think that she should have, tried to reconnect or move back to China to be with, the other guy. So it's like, I'm not sure what people are seeing. It's just, no, it's like, okay, valiant effort, but you missed the mark.
Now, the other interesting part, and I want to kind of play on this, as I said, when they talked about past lives, what they were saying, or at least the idea, has to do with this idea that if our lives keep coinciding and we keep connecting, it means that we had past lives in 8,000 years ago or whatever, and therefore something had happened, but it's not our reality now. But to be honest with you, even their past lives in reality isn't anything exciting to talk about. She brushes him off. They don't speak for 12 years. They go to Korea and he ignores them, and now all of a sudden, at this point in time, he decides that he's going to take a trip to New York to see them. It's his vacation. But we soon realize that what he really is doing, or at least what they having the character do, is to go see her. And it's so awkward, Catherine, when the husband is there. It is so awkward. It should be comfortable. It shouldn't be awkward. But it's
Right.
so awkward as he's sitting there. And I'm like, is something going to happen? Absolutely nothing happened. It's like, nobody takes any action. And that might be the biggest fault of this film, is the fact that the actions that they're taking are, they probably would have like deleted each other's phone numbers years ago. Like this, there would be no reconciliation and, hey, how are you, out of the blue. They wouldn't be seeing each other. This whole thing of like this romantic take about it and all the smiles and stuff, it's about as warm and loving and genuine as a corporate meetup, where you try to have those team building moments. This is what this kind of feels like they're forced to go on some kind of corporate team meeting in New York, and somebody has to catch somebody and they got to do a skyline and go see the Statue of Liberty and all this sort of stuff. And in the end, it's like the most heartless, empty kind of feeling. There is no passion whatsoever here. There's no real feeling. It's almost as if their parents are saying, you really need to talk to this person. Maybe it's like a parent's wish, or some kind of odd cultural wish, that they should have ended up together, but they didn't. Like, it's got this weird kind of element to it that feels very forced to it. But overall, it makes the film feel rather lacking in any kind of substance. So, I think it is very interesting. They tried to put the cultural thing in it, make it look interesting. In the end, it's like a very cute kind of after school special. My friend I left back, in my home country, and he's going to come and see me. And aren't we going to have a great time in New York? I'm going to take him to the Statue of Liberty, and then he's going to go home. So, for those of you who are
Yeah.
watching,
Like you said at the beginning of the movie, when the two moms are talking to each other about, oh, you're gonna have, about the fact they're not gonna be seeing each other anymore, or whatever. And it's like, okay, so you're saying goodbye to a friend, or whatever, but it's still not, like, how many people think about, a childhood friend from like first grade and thought that they were gonna plan like, yeah, they were cutesy when she's like, oh, I'm gonna marry him someday, or whatever. Yeah, it's little kids being cute. It's not. And again, like you said, the fact that there's all these time jumps where they're not thinking of each other or whatever, and when they meet, it's like, how often have you guys actually been thinking about each other in all these years apart? I don't think you've been thinking about each other very much. It's like, and now you're here, and like you said, for some reason the director chose to make the scenes with them hanging out and the husband there awkward, which again it wouldn't be. It's like, oh yeah, here's a friend I knew from first grade from China, and he's here. It's like, okay, cool. It's like, why are you? It's like, it just doesn't. No.
now,
And
what I think would have been interesting, Catherine, is if they met each other and something did happen. I think this could have been
exactly.
something would have been, and of course, guys, yes, I am going to say it, where they actually have some kind of intimate relationship. And then let's say what I personally would have done would have been for them to have that intimate relationship. And if it's every 12 years, then it's every 12 years. But they needed to have a deeper level of intimacy for us to be convinced that this is a legitimate relationship and something is going on. And then, of course, after she's married, now he's knocking on the door again 12 years later. And she thought she broke this thing off when she says, look, I don't want to talk to you anymore. Look, we had great sex. We were wonderful, but you're back home. I'm in New York. My life's different now. I really care about you, but we probably should just, end this because you don't ever want to move here. I don't want to move back home and we can't have a relationship. Suddenly he pops up 12 years later. That could have been very interesting as to what was going to happen between these two people whose level of interest, the only thing really keeping them apart in a sense would be that they live in different countries, but they really do care about each other. I am not convinced they even care about each other or love each other. I think that's the worst part of this film, is that in the end, when she walks into that Uber, Catherine, she can't wait to see the back of him.
And it's kind of funny because they did have the elements here to do something with it, because between the two of them, he's the one who seems to be longing for it, even though, again, in both scenarios, it seems like they were getting along just fine. But the fact that he's the one who's initiating all of these past lives conversations shows that he's the one who feels like he's missing something. And whether he's right or wrong, he seems to think that it's her, where she kind of initially only agreed to Skype with him as like an experiment. Oh, he's looking for me. Have fun. I'll just, whatever. And so it's like he would probably be the one to initiate something out of it, or maybe he would say something when the three of them are at the bar that would make it super awkward and accentuate, like, or something where he would reveal that he did something like, oh, it turns out I didn't just visit here. I actually got like a job transfer here and I bought an apartment or something like that. So they're going to see each other. They're going to be, whether they want to see each other or not, or whether she wants to see him or not, he's going to be around. Now that would be something, doing something with it and making it more complicated. But all it is really when them hanging out, they're just kind of pontificating about what could have been and not really doing anything with that. It's like, yeah, that's your premise. It's like I said the same thing when I saw the Zone of Interest. It's like, yeah, I saw the trailer. This is a great premise, but you have to do something with that premise to make it a good movie. And I don't feel they really did anything with the premise here.
They did nothing with it. It feels very forced. And, in the end, if I were that husband, I would be like, yeah, I don't need to hang out with you guys. You ain't going to do shit. Nothing's happening because you haven't acted on it for the past 30 something years anyway. Nothing's going to happen. Go ahead, go hang out. I don't even need to meet this guy because I know you're not going to do anything because of the way you've even been treating him. And honestly, and the last thing I'm actually going to say about poor past lives is I was shocked when she said she didn't want to speak to him anymore. That kind of threw me. And I think that might have also been an indication that the movie itself, I probably should have said, I don't want to see any more of this film. But I didn't. I watched it to the end. But I think that kind of shocked me because it was pretty clear either she didn't want to be with him anymore. But why? Why would you do that to a friend? You've been, doing all these Zoom calls. Why suddenly I can't speak to you? He just didn't want to be with him. So it becomes even more awkward knowing that she could care less whether she's even talking to this guy for 12 years. I think that speaks volumes.
Well, to me, it seems like the reason she said, I don't want to see you anymore, is that she might think she's developing some type of feelings for him as well, and thinking, like, she can't show it on her face because her husband's sitting there with him at the bar, but maybe she's thinking, oh, maybe it would have been a better life. And she doesn't want to actually say that, and she can't because her husband's there, which is why she tells him, I don't want to see you anymore. That's kind of how I interpreted it. Maybe. I'm not sure, because that's kind of what I was thinking with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree with you, Catherine. There's no way this film is going to win Movie of the Year. I don't know why it was nominated. I have no idea why it's even in this list. I don't understand it. I don't know if there's any other films that should have been nominated that should have had this spot. But this one, it's literally, they just wanted to tack it on. I think they felt, let's tack it on for a particular reason, for whatever reason it is. But it's not what I consider best movie material. And that, as I said, it's almost meaningless. I feel like I was watching, as I said, a very, like an after school special. You one kid moves to another town and it's a different high school, and then their friend comes up and shows up after a while. That's what this felt like. I could have watched that at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Catherine, 20 years ago. So
I've kind of felt the same about a lot of the Best Picture nominees this year. It's like just because you can expand the category to 10 doesn't mean shit. Like some years they've had it only be 9 or 8. Several of them I looked at this year, movies I would cross off the Best Picture list. This is one of them, and there are a couple others that we talked about, like Anatomy of a Fall is one I'd cross off the list. Zone of Interest I would cross off the list. A couple others already crossed off the list. I crossed off the list. It's like there's other movies, but I think it's also a symptom of, did it create buzz? Like for some reason this created buzz because it was released back in June, I think it was, or something, or it was made the festival circuit. Whereas, depending on what festivals you premiere at, or depending on how much of a marketing push the studio does, depends on, whether or not people are going to see it. And I admit that the acting scenes in is really good, and it's staged rather well. And maybe that's what people were seeing in it. But when you look at the whole picture of it, it's like narratively with all the time jumps and stuff, this just doesn't really work. And I'm not really there's no reason for me to connect with any of these characters because you didn't give me a reason to at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, it's too bad that they dropped the ball with it. And I also think that as a movie, it could have been something interesting, but it could be even more interesting as a play if they do this correctly, if they invest in the relationship in a play. Like if you were looking at a theater, I think it would also be something that might even be better than what they could do with a movie. But that is pretty much it. Catherine, any final thoughts on Past Lives or Poor Things?
I think between the two of them, Poor Things was the better movie for sure. But even with Poor Things, as far as Oscars go, it would be, Emma Stone for lead actress, and then the set design and costumes and the makeup hairstyle, that was just incredible. But they're also both, like I said, Poor Things isn't a movie I would necessarily revisit that much either. Because even though it's like only like less than 2 hours 20 minutes, it still felt really long because it's like a very one track character, no real subplots, very one track kind of things happen at random. Whereas Past Lives, again, it just didn't connect at all. So it's like, So, two films I wouldn't necessarily. I mean, I get why Poor Things is nominated for Best Picture because it's Yorgos Lanthimos has got a recognizable name and it's very unique, and people talk about it really unique. Would it be on the list? I don't know. I'm kind of teetering as to whether or not I would have nominated it, but.
No. Yeah, and I think what could be interesting about Poor Things and films like Poor Things would to kind of have that experimental category for films that you can't quite place into one area, things that do require an immense amount of imagination, an immense amount of, looking very specifically at things that are surrealist or artsy. Perhaps there should be a category for something like that. I think Poor Things would have won that this year. And I think Barbie could go in that category too, of just kind of looking at this fantasy world. You're looking at things that are that way. I don't really know how it's in this list of, against other films that have a different type of direction altogether. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this turns out. But Catherine, where can people find you?
You can find me at Sly Snide at Letterboxd, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram at those places. And you can find me Thursday nights at 7, usually on the Fantasmagorium show YouTube channel. Scott and I are reviewing the Fargo show right now, season 4. We've got all the other stuff. We got Batman and James Bond reviews and Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez reviews, all sorts of fun stuff there you can check out. And then every second and fourth Sunday of the month at 8 a.m. Pacific, we have on the Virtual Cantina Network, we have the Unifying Force, a Star Wars talk show. It's fun. So yeah.
Excellent, Catherine. And guys, of course, you can find me here on the Burnettwork as well as on Positive Fandom and my channel, Roman Empire Matters. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I so appreciate it. Catherine and I will be back next week. We're going to be reviewing The Zone of Interest and Maestro, the last two, and then gearing up pretty much for our live Oscar and BAFTA review party. If Catherine can make both, hopefully she can, but it's going to be so much fun. We're going to be talking about the movies, and I so appreciate you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here, everybody who showed up tonight. And guys, remember, no matter where you are in the galaxy, always remember to please be kind Take care, everybody.